But why these process groups are also relevant in itself, they're not just the container for the Lego bricks, but there are certain SAP solutions and scope items that do not fit one-to-one to an end-to-end scenario, but they are very much related to this, let's say, the overarching topic of sales order management or customer contracts.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this deep dive session today. My name is Jette, and today I have with me Russell Gomersall, one of the partners of BP Experts. Welcome, Russell.
Thank you, Jette. Yes, and thanks for inviting me to talk about business flows.
Of course, yes. So I already mentioned we're going to start with a deep dive session today into business flows, the framework of BP Experts. And we're going to focus on the lead to cash domain. But maybe before we get started into that, Russell, if you wouldn't mind, could you give us a brief introduction of what business flows actually is?
Oh, of course, certainly. Yeah, so how do I start? As a company, BP Experts, we have been engaged in supporting companies in process-driven thinking around their business transformations. And anybody who's been engaged in BPM and process management has always been encountered with the difficulties of actually initially starting a project, starting and setting up a process repository, defining the architecture, the conventions, and then starting to model from scratch. And with all the advantages of BPM, this has always been a huge challenge in a lot of initiatives because typically it's something that you don't have so much time for. So if BPM has been implemented in companies on a long term, not in the direct context of supporting an initiative, you have the time to maybe, or you used to have the time to build up such an architecture, think about it, define it all. To accelerate this, we have let's say comprised all our experience and best practices on setting up a process repository in order to accelerate such initiatives. So for companies that want to engage in a larger initiative, which do not have a dedicated process repository covering the scope of the initiative, we offer a solution which is a predefined process framework that you can more or less plug and play, import it into your tool agnostic. What you see here is the Signavio environment, but it works with RS. We've done projects with GBTech, we've done projects with Eneas, many various tools. It's tool agnostic, but it definitely is something that already accelerates the project extremely. And some of the aspects that we've brought in, and this is why we're doing these deep dives and this publication like series, is to also show how it's structured, also what is in it from a content perspective, but also how it supports initiatives. And in this case, we want to dive deeply into how it supports SAP HANA implementations, because here we know in the industries that we cover that this is a real pain point nowadays, that SAP and HANA, very process driven. Now they see the necessity to build up repositories, but they're seeing that even if they have done this in the past, it's not fitting to the philosophy and the approach they need to be successful in their projects. And this is where Business Flows has an answer. Another aspect, before we dig into the deep dive specifically into one domain, which we want to cover today, just a quick overview. One of the main aspects is that we think end to end. And when you look at this map, the naming that we have here is already strongly aligned to the naming conventions and the repository of that SAP provides for their solution process. But what we want to build up is a business architecture. We want to cover the business processes of a company, and we do this in a very end-to-end focused manner, because not just for SAP, but for a lot of initiatives, the integrative department overarching, functionally overarching concepts are elementary to actually implement and operationalize a business strategy. The domains that are currently covered in business flows are the idea to market, plan to fulfill, lead to cash, source to pay, finance, acquire to decommission. Here you would also have plant maintenance in there, but also anything around CapEx, OpEx projects, some governance topics, and the recruit to retire. What we want to focus on today is the lead to cash, where I will do a drill down the different aspects and the content we have here, and also go a bit into the industry specifics. So this is one of the big things that where we used to have a generic content, we now have a more industry specific scoped view, because we saw that there's a lot of overlap, there's a lot of scenarios also in best practices of SAP that suit various industries, but it's getting so much that we said, let's just refocus on certain process industries to have a more industry specific fit of the reference content that we provide. So the deep dive today will be lead to cash process industry.
Great, Russell. Thank you so much for this introduction. And as we're talking process industry, maybe also just in a few sentences for the listeners that are not aware about the different industry, how would you describe the process industry?
Well, in industries, you typically very roughly differentiate between the discrete manufacturing and process industry, where process industry is typically where you process production processes is around batches. Versus actually like assembling a car, where you have discrete parts that you actually put together. The ideal process industry is chemicals or any other, let's say, where you have physical or chemical reactions of fluids that are mixed. So here you think more about recipes, and the batch and the recipe is one aspect that you could take to differentiate it. There is, of course, if you look at the process industry, you also have, next to the actual batch production, you also have semi-continuous, or you will have continuous production cycles that also apply. I would, though, think that in most of the industries, process industries, we are talking about typical batch productions. Now, the batch product, and here, when you think about what that range is. Now, I said chemicals, but you also have to see that a lot of food processing happens. So if you're making drinks, or you're making maybe something like a soup or anything around this, or or dairy products, then also we're talking about a process industry. Now, this is not all the case for all food industries again. So the differentiating character is actually the way you actually have several, let's say, ingredients, that you are processing physically or with a chemical reaction to actually create a new product. This brings certain aspects to it on a level that you cannot divide this batch anymore. So it is really a new product, whereas a car, theoretically, you can dismantle. Now, why is this important? We'll see later traceability. If you want to, do quality control, theoretically, if you deliver a certain machine with certain parts to a customer and it doesn't work, you would be able to disassemble it and identify what has gone wrong. With a batch, that becomes much more complicated. But that's not just the only aspect. And what I think is interesting is that, of course, when we go down to lead to cash, it'll be interesting to see, so where per domain does process industry really play a role? What I talked about was more impacting, of course, the plan to fulfill. So if we do a deep dive there, we will say different ways of producing that need to be reflected in the business processes. So the question may be, where in lead to cash does this play a role? And of course, there will be not so many differentiating aspects here, but it's always good to say, how do we reflect the process industry and the specialities of the capabilities they need? For example, the batch management, how do they actually impact a standard lead to cash process?
Okay, great. Thank you so much for this overview, Russell. So then I would suggest we get started into the deep dive and look at the details of the lead to cash domain.
Absolutely. And so when we talk about lead to cash, I think when we're talking about, say, the organization, like a human being or so let's say an animal, then I think the lead to cash is really what brings the products and services to the customer. So here, if you're thinking about it, this is it's really like the legs of an organism. So I think the actual production is something that is, producing is something that is very focused on the internal. So maybe it's like the digestive system there. The finance and controlling and all the strategy processes are more around the brain, and managing and controlling things, that they all work together in a manner that the organism can actually survive. But here with the lead to cash, is everything about the extremities of what you need to do to actually move as an organization. Now, This is now a view on the actual domain itself, the way we've structured it. And something that is a big shift to the way we used to structure the business flows is that we have pulled together the end-to-end scenarios, which from the domain would have been are the actual heart of our operations from a process perspective. We also have the functional process groups, which act as a library of processes based on which we will then put together processes for the end-to-end scenarios. We'll dive into that. And what we also have new is on the left-hand side, the transformational drivers. So here the focus is clear on, we have a business transformation. We have certain aspects from our strategy that we want to operationalize. How do these translate for the domain into drivers and required capabilities? So this is what we have now also on the left-hand side. So the idea is that we say, okay, we have a certain need in our organization to let's say, excel in the way we do our integrated planning. And one of the drivers is we need a vertical integration between S&OP and production, a classical problem, not a specific, of course, for process industries, but definitely something that is relevant for this industry. So how do you manage in such a volatile industry or a volatile economy and global situation to actually ensure that you have a real integrated planning from your long-term yearly business plan or integrated business plan down to the weekly plan without any disruptions there. So this is something that could be one of the challenges you want to cover. And in this, and then you want to then break down how this reflects on certain end-to-end scenarios, or you could also rephrase it and say how certain end-to-end scenarios are designed in order to support this. So this is a very, and we think for an initiative, it's always important to set your strategic guardrails, which we do here, and then also scope coming from your operating model, what different end-to-end scenarios do you actually require? Looking at the transformation drivers, they are clustered. So definitely integrated planning is a big topic. We believe the industry always has to ensure very much more into the lead to cash, of course, marketing, pricing, and customer journeys. So here, definitely there are things about optimizing your margins in complex quotations, omni-channel, order management, support evolving business models, all three things that definitely are also impacting the process industry, and where you want to ensure that in your business transformation, you do not just do a technological transfer or transition or transformation, but you also ensure that the future processes and IT system helps you excel in these topics. That's the logic. And to have this in one view clearly shows that they're ensured better than before, that you have a close alignment between what we want to achieve and what are the processes that we want to design and implement in a manner to achieve this. Let's just walk through the other clusters without going too much in deep. We could always pick out them one to see how we actually then drill down and map this against possible solutions. So the last one is operational excellence in order management and execution. Very obvious that this is then something that you want to achieve. And here we have various different drivers that we can then drill down to. And just to this is a starting point for discussion. The expectation is that customers take these, reflect on them, say which ones are in a priority for the initiative, maybe change them, enhance them, maybe even reduce them to be more focused. Mm-hmm. So this is a starting point, already giving you the methodology and an impulse that, of course, has to be fine-tuned for the specific customer. That's it. Okay, then if we say something just randomly taken out from operational excellence, we say integrated operations between legal entities. Now, just again, for somebody who is maybe not so accustomed with the way large enterprises work, a lot of around the process industry, typically it's not so simple that you just say, I have one recipe, I take three ingredients, put them together, mix it or let it react, and then I have my final product. You would always have stages where, for example, you have the filling into, for example, fluids into barrels or into bottles. And the bottling process can be a real bottleneck. That's a pun. A real bottleneck because sometimes you can create a big batch of very simple product, let's say apple juice, and then it's all about the high-speed filling and labeling and distribution of the products, which is actually the one thing that you really have to excel in. Or, for example, if you have food industry, it's quite not so easy, but something where you can create a big batch of let's say, cake mixtures or puddings, but then actually packing them in an efficient manner in very small batches is something that can really be highly expensive and something you need to. Mm-hmm. But the main point is here about integrated operations is that a lot of the times you have multi-stage production. So you have intermediate products. These intermediate products can be stored, they can be distributed, and then they can be refined or customized for certain further products. So you have a multi-stage production. And what companies may do on a global scale is that they will have certain operating models, that they will have certain factories creating the intermediate products. These will then be distributed to smaller factories that actually do the customization, or let's say it could be a color-based component is then colored in a certain manner that it fits then the requirements of a customer, and is then packed and let's say filled into the buckets to be distributed. And these kind of operations, you have a lot because they really create efficiency, because the intermediate products you could do in big batches, but the actual then specific fine-tuning of the product for the customer you want to do in a later stage, or more based on the actual demand that is coming in. So this kind of an operation requires sometimes on a global scale for different parts of the organization to work together, replenish products, produce products. The planning has to be aligned across all these plants, and of course the distribution and the production has to be aligned across all these legal entities. And this is something also highly complex from a process perspective, also from the value flow perspective, and that's something where companies need to work on. And this is also where, when we go down, there are certain capabilities behind this that support this. Now, capabilities in our model are, first of all, something, let's say, abstract, where we say a process and together with an IT system needs to actually provide or support us in having a business, the capability to do, for example, advanced intercompany operations, or the business capability to do an intercompany invoicing, management, and settlement. Now, this is something, even without SAP, you would have to do in order to have an integrated operations. And the question is, how can how can SAP help here, and how do you want to do this in your project? And this is exactly where we have a description of this business capability, but we also have mapped these out against certain SAP scope items. The scope items are solution processes. So they are a definition of, I would say, if you take an SAP solution, there are certain solution processes that you can take and customize to your specific needs, but they are baseline for your implementation. So if you have the challenge of integrated operation between sales entities and you want to digitalize, automate, and support your business capability to invoice and settle on an intercompany level, then you will have the scope item 6WC, convergent invoicing intercompany settlement. The add-on public edition is a hint that this is specifically bound to the public cloud HANA solution. Yeah, and this is one of the solution processes. There is then for each of these scope items, there are also diagrams and descriptions, also how it helps you do this better. And this is something that you can take into scope for your initiative if this business capability is something that you have in mind to implement with your transformation. This is something, the logic on how, from a transformational driver, a strategy, a challenge, is broken down into certain capabilities, and the capabilities are then linked to a certain solution process. Now, the main important thing here is that the solution process itself needs to be embedded in your processes. And this is where we then come to the actual end-to-end scenarios, where we will also then want to identify what different variants of business do you do, and where will this business capability actually then be relevant. And we will then also see how then also here there will be a mapping between the end-to-end scenario and this related scope item. So you angle your scoping on how to deploy and implement SAP from two angles. One of them more from the business capability, from your strategic key requirements perspective, and one of them more from the your operations perspective, where you say these are different end-to-end scenarios the system has to fulfill for us to be able to actually operate. And this is what I would like to now just walk you through, how we have actually structured this and how we bring end-to-end thinking to organizations.
Sounds good.
The first thing is that we have here a bit of a shift where before we had differentiated two different domains between lead to order and order to cash. We have this summarized to lead to cash. That is due to the fact that also SAP has clustered them in this manner. So here you will see that just from a naming convention, which you can adapt if you think differently about naming conventions, that we have like the prefix of this subtopic L2O and OTC still in the naming convention. And the end-to-end scenarios are clustered around topics. And we have, say, on the left-hand side, we have all the lead to order. So everything that from a customer inquiry down to, I would say at least the quotation is captured in these clusters. We also include campaign management. So this is actually even a precursor to the lead. How do you actually get campaigns? You have to communicate, you have to visit certain events, maybe do an email campaign, go to fairs and exhibitions. Also, these need processes. Are they related to SAP? Relatively, but typically, even when you get down to the financials of paying or investing in certain things, you will then also have topics touching the SAP aspect, where you may need approvals for certain budgets and rounds. You will want to include, say, the budgets and the costs that you have in your. You will need cost centers which you book against. So even such something that is so far away from typical SAP topics, you will want to document your processes and see where you have touch points. And from a business architecture sense, we also want to support customers in having a comprehensive set of processes in place, despite the actual scope then of the SAP project that they directly have in mind. So we have the campaign management, then we have the lead and opportunity management. And also this is worth remarking that say, okay, process industry, we're talking about typical B2B business. When you're looking at pharmaceutical or chemical industries, but it does also cover the process industry customers that will be selling products to maybe to retailers, but typically not down to the end consumer. Nevertheless, there is still the necessity to manage the leads and the requests they get in a very structured manner. Again, here with business flows, you have an approach where you can use this to then take decisions on which solution you want to use. It doesn't have to be SAP alone. Around this area, a lot of customers, for example, use Salesforce. And what is really important here is then to have these end-to-end scenarios, because typically, for example, for quotation, that you will need an integrated process between Salesforce and SAP, where the quotes are in some integration scenarios, they are created on the SAP side. In other scenarios, they may be created in the Salesforce, but then they have to be transferred to SAP so that when an order comes, it can then be matched against a certain quote that has gone out to then process this seamlessly in the order to cash scenario. So here, even if you're looking at this, the scope of a HANA project, it's very important to look also the comprehensive set of processes that you have in place reflect your business architecture. Even if you say this is currently out of scope, it is definitely a process you would want to reflect on in the context of your organization. Then, of course, the whole topic around quotation. And here there typically are, let's say, different ways of providing quotations. This highly depends also on the complexity of your products. So sometimes you have standard products which have a standard pricing, but then sometimes you have inquiries for non-standard products where you may even think about going into a certain iteration on a feasibility study. If you can provide this product, what you would have to then adapt, for example, specify let's say even a known dedicated recipe to fulfill the requirements of this customer. And based on this newly developed recipe, you would then want to actually then calculate the price. So, and then create a quotation. So there can be very simple ways of going from an inquiry to a quotation, which can be highly automated, and they can become quite complex, and even down to the level that you need more a project based tender management, where you say, okay, this request for maybe a long-term contract or a very complex product is something that requires us to invest a lot of time, coordinate tasks. And for this reason, with a big tender, we actually want to do this on a project base. So we have from a very simple scenario down to a very complex scenario, we have different variants. And each of these variants, then just to maybe take one, is then in our business flows has a detailed description, and will then also have, then as we mentioned before, a mapping against the solution, the scope items of SAP. And this is so you're going around scoping and getting a picture of what on the SAP solution you want to use. Based on these two angles, what do we actually require from a process perspective? What scenarios do we have? And what strategic business capabilities do we want to implement? And by looking at both angles, you then get to a very solid set of what do we need to implement for our operations, and what do we want to implement in order to achieve a certain excellence. These are the two angles that we want to cover in the preparation phase of a project before we then take this down through the phases of activate to implement. Let's just walk through and just pull out some additional say examples just to get down to the deep dive, and then also go a bit into the let's say the core of lead to cash around the products around the order to cash. So one of the things is, of course, every company that develops products and produces products really needs to sell these products. Yeah, that's for sure. And here again, it's not as simple as it looks, and that's why we have quite a lot of variance around the product sales. So a standard case would be that I produce something, standard product, just like I have a standard product with a standard price, and it's very easy principally to sell because you could even have people sending in via a catalog doing the sales. It's something I put on stock, and then as soon as the order is received, I check if I have enough on stock, and then I just trigger them. We also may have products that maybe have a expiration date because they're maybe volatile, and you don't want to put them on stock because they may, they may decay for whatever reasons. It could be a chemical, it could be a biological problem that you may have. That you may have certain products, or you do not have such a high demand. So it's maybe something very specific that a customer requests, or he requests it in a manner that you don't know actually when he will be requesting it. You may have the intermediates on stock, yeah, but then as soon as the order comes, you make to order, yeah. So you will then do the final production steps, and the filling steps you will do only after receiving the order. Now, so there's different scenarios why you want to do this, but it definitely decouples. Then it's easier to plan the demand on an intermediate product, yeah, like a bulkware, and then have the flexibility to fulfill the dedicated orders based on a customization make-to-order process. Yeah, so you're decoupling then actually the volatile end consumer customizing of the product versus then the bulk intermediates that you then have on stock. Even that would be a make to order. Then procure to order is around trading goods that you don't produce yourself. Sales via subcontracting is something where you actually have a subcontractor doing certain or all the actual processing of the processes. Then you have, as I was mentioning before, that you will have sales via intercompany with or without a purchase order. That depends on the organizational setup, how you have then actually distributing and selling across your global entities. These are then also sales scenarios where you have with the PO you even have like a purchase order that then actually is invoiced, and you also have to have certain like orders that you then or quotes or some internal contracts based on which you can then actually settle this. And then last but not least, also a third-party sales that is directly routed from the third party to your customer. So you see that even the normal production, and these are definitely all scenarios that would not just be purely specific for the process industry, but which we see very often covered in process industry. Now, there's always then a lot of, let's say, variance, where I just need to scroll out a bit. And we have then the topic of consignment sales. So this is when you actually have a warehouse on the customer site, and the customer then takes product and will also tell you when to fill it up and when to pick it up again, and then you have a regular payment schedule over which then you invoice what the customer has taken out of your stock that is on his site. Yeah. So why do you do this? Of course, it's quite easy. The demand and the time that the customer needs this product can be very short term. He wants to have a direct access to it, but he doesn't want to build up his own stock. So you're being as nice as actually, as long as you own it, it's your cost. And you're not putting the burden of the customer having to buy all the product up front, but he only then pays you for exactly what he has consumed. And this is a good way, of course, for you. Why do you do this? You said, well, if he has it on site, why doesn't he pay for it? He said, well, it's a good way of binding your customer and saying, okay, you want to consume, you can always have it anytime. I will just put something in front of your door and you could just eat it. And then at the end of the month, I'll just send you a bill. So that's like sometimes you have, I don't know if you see the candy bar. If you like, we had in the offices, there would be like service providers. They would come in and they would put then like a big box with all the candy, and then you would go by, you would take it, and then you would throw in the money into the cash box. That's consignment, yeah. And every time you went by, I said, "Oh, I need a Snickers," yeah, and you buy. I mean, there's a different motivation why they do consignment, because they know exactly if they place it there, you're going to consume it. But ultimately, the Snickers that he's put into your office, he still owns it. Yeah. And in the moment where you consume it when you buy it. Yeah. And if you see that they're going off, or you say, hey, you know what, the candy bar's empty, fill it up. That's the consignment fill up request that you do. Just very simply explained. But definitely in a lot of businesses, a very standard business. Yeah. Now, what is interesting as well, you see here, and I think this is important as well, we've included customer projects, engineer to order, sales of solutions, customer service projects. Now, from what I've explained before, you would say, okay, so what is chemical industry or what you've been talking about? Why do you need an engineered product or a solution? Now, you have to see that a lot of customers, they become more and more specialized. Although the core business would still be, I would say, creating a recipe and mixing a certain batch, very primitively speaking. The products are highly specialized now. So a lot of specialized companies will actually go further in diversifying the way they actually provide a certain product. So, for example, a company may be creating, let's say, glues, yeah. But then they will diversify in glues that can be used for in the automotive industry, and the application of this product can become actually something of their, let's say, something they develop, that they do not just develop the actual glue, but they also develop the application of how you use this glue to, let's say, stick in window panes into cars. Now, for just one example. So where before you would mantle it with a certain rubber strip, you say in future you can do, you can stick them in. Now, the core business is still the glue, and that's where they say the recipe of this glue, and that it doesn't, that it holds, and all the certifications that you need to use this in an automotive industry. But definitely, the application of this glue is something that you then provide as a service. You go out and maybe train them on how to actually you work with engineering companies together that actually have the technology for applying the glue in the right manner, processing the glue in the right manner in order to achieve a certain product. So the application of certain products and developing this application technology and knowledge is something where specialized products are offering more than just the glue. Now, before that wasn't part of the business model. It's something we need to do that to be able to sell the glue. But what they are now learning is that is part of the business, and you can get paid for actually providing these services. Just one random example, but there's a lot of examples where highly specialized products require highly specialized services on top in order to actually then apply or use these products in the right manner. And this is something where we see, and the very successful champions around the industry are definitely the ones that are just not focusing on the pure product as is, as you used to do traditionally, but thinking more about what problem do I solve with my product, and how can I actually develop services and products around this core product, which has my core intellectual property, to actually then gain a competitive advantage against others. And that's something that a lot of companies now do and are expanding in more. And whereas before they thought our core competence is just doing let's say creating this glue, the glue and the recipe over a certain time, maybe let's say copied by a company in Asia, they will come up to speed to actually then create let's say this also for half the price. So the only way companies can really survive is actually by further developing and refining their products according to always have this cutting edge against the ones that copy. And this again is then something where more and more the products that you're developing are integrated into the sales cycle, where you want to not just by yourself develop products, but you actually want to develop products based on requirements of your customer, which we're going back to the lead area. And based on this, then also thinking about, is it just this pure one product that you need, but is it like a combination, and is it also an application technology that you need to actually also buy in order to solve your problem? And so they're thinking much more holistically around their products than they used to before. And this is the cutting edge that these companies have, where they will always be on the front edge of actually having the highest better margins and the cutting edge against then products that become at a certain time a commodity. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's just walk through then. And when we get into the end of the cycle, of course, there's certain things around billing and payments that are always diverse and something that is just a standard industry that you need to look into. But what is also I mentioned the sales of services can always be certain things around trainings that you may be doing that you can sell, or some advisory services based on the products that are applied. This can also be sold independently from the products. And there may even be certain royalties combined with your sales, that you have certain intellectual properties that you want to also then include in the usage of the products, that you also have a certain royalty that is also accompanied by that. And of course, then on the end of the chain, there may be also, of course, the customer returns. But more important, I think, in the process industry is the whole thing about returnable materials. This can be the returnable packaging, deposit, or rental. So if I create big batches, then typically a lot of the times, for example, for consignment, for sales, I will sell them the product and I will provide it in a big vessel. So, and this vessel has it's not just like let's say a cheap bucket that can be disposed of, but it's something that is in itself an own asset. Costs a lot of money, and you want to have it returned. Now, if you sell your product with a certain value, typically the customer won't want to pay you for this expensive vessel. On the other hand, he will not always a lot of them says, okay, I come with a tanker, I fill out my product, and then I leave again. They have their own vessels to store it. There is a lot, say like with bottles as well. They say, okay, give me the barrels or the vessel. As soon as I've consumed it, I will send it back. Now, that means that what you've invested in, you've bought these vessels. They can be highly big, complex, having to provide, it could be stainless steel containers for certain reasons. They could be very expensive. Now, these are standing, you paid for them, they're your ownership. They're standing at a customer site. You need to track them. You need to know where they are. Now, let's take the extreme business around this, and that's the gas industry, also process industry in a certain manner, and they have with very special, let's say, aspects around that. But they are actually taking air and bottling it, and the let's say separating air, and the value of the air it's not super expensive, the product itself, but they're in comparison to the vessels the bottles that they are sending out. and they have also several million bottles around. So they have floating values distributed globally that they need to take care of. And here there are different ways of handling this from the tracking perspective, but also then if you do it per deposit or rental, yeah, you can say, okay, you can have it, but you have to pay a certain fee, yeah. And the longer you have it, then the more you have to pay, which is intrinsically motivating for them to then use it in a certain manner and then send it back. The deposit is also something you can do, but that's the thing about deposits. If somebody pays 50 euros deposit and he hands it back after 1 month, and the other person pays 50 euros deposit and hands it back after 10 years, although the vessel costs 2,000 euros, it's not a really good deal. That's why typically you would rather go in direction of a rental or even selling the vessel. Your customer will be rather expecting at max to pay a certain deposit, or even will try to negotiate now. So this is how you actually deal this, but fundamentally on the processes behind it, there's a big difference. Yeah, and then all around quality control. We also have, of course, if the products don't fulfill the requirements of the customer, they can be returns. There can be complaints with or without returns. Sometimes the customer has already consumed it or he scraps it himself, and you give him a credit note or you give him an alternative product that you send. So there's even beneath here, there's certain variants that you need to also, when you receive the product back from the returns, you need to then also check it, what you want to do with it, on what way. So you have to then make the usage decision. And then even after the usage decision, there is an internal process on maybe what you want to do with it. If you need to scrap it, if you want to rework it. These are all scenarios that are actually covered in the production. Where the actual disposal or the sometimes you can rework products and put them into some lower quality products or reuse them. Similar to a discrete manufacturer, you can disassemble it and maybe use certain components and put them back on stock. Sometimes with certain products, you can rework them. You can put, say, 10% of the product into a new batch, and so you're not scrapping it. There's certain rules and regulations on what you can do. This would not happen with food, but in other chemical industries, you can do it. Yeah. So there's very much differentiates. This is very much different depending on the product. So looking at the also at the time, I just wanted to give you a cross view on certain let's say deep dives into certain scenarios. I think we've covered the clusters in itself and also then certain flows that we see. The flows themselves always consist of processes, and these processes are then as occurrence copies. We will find them in these process groups. So you see here there is a collection of processes which have been also seen being reused in the value chains. But why these process groups are also relevant in itself, they're not just the container for the Lego bricks, but there are certain SAP solutions and scope items that do not fit one-to-one to an end-to-end scenario, but they are very much related to this, let's say, the overarching topic of sales order management or customer contracts. So, and to capture the completeness of the SAP solutions, these process groups are relevant for actually having then also an entry point into certain let's say solution processes that may not have been covered in the end-to-end scenarios. Yeah, so definitely the process. That's why these process groups here are not just are placed here for a reason. Principally, you could say, yes, just hide them, and we have the library somewhere else. That's what we used to do. But we want to pull everything together that somehow is used to scope yours an SAP solution, from where then you could drive in complete, let's say, as a complete entity, all these three key, let's say hierarchical trees, the transformation drivers, end-to-end scenarios, and the process groups, all cross-reference then in complete the scope of SAP best practices or scope items that you want to then implement in the context of your domain lead to cash. That's something quite. So I hope I managed to cover the essence of the lead to cash. Of course, we're always very happy to do customer walkthroughs and do presentations. And again, this is a starting point for accelerating your business transformation. So it's always important that you take this and go through it, adapt it to your operations, adapt the transformation drivers to your strategy, rename according to the way you work, and scope the solutions according to your solution implementation strategy. Replace SAP where you are using other systems. Bring in then a complete view on your IT architecture and application landscape based on the discussions around these topics. That's what we want to encourage our customers to do when they engage using business flows.
Yeah, Russell, thank you so much for giving us this overview. I thought it was very interesting. And thank you so much to everyone watching. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions or if you want to request a free demo. And we'll see you at the next session. Thank you so much, Russell.
It was a pleasure. Thank you very much for listening. And yes, let's maybe dive into some other domains sometime.
Absolutely. Thank you, Russell. Bye.
Take care. Bye.